We need Don.
I jumped down, but I'm too old. Good to see you. No, don't even think about it.
In the morning and you see that crazy sun, keep me in your heart for a while. There's a train leaving nightly called when all is said and done. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sometimes when you're doing simple things around the house, maybe you'll think of me and smile. You know I'm tied to you like the buttons on your blouse. Keep me in your heart for a while. Hold me in your thoughts. Take me to your dreams. Touch me as I fall into view. And when the winter comes, keep the fires lit, and I will be right next to you. Engine drivers headed north to Pleasant Stream. Keep me in your heart for a while. These wheels keep turning, but they're running out of steam. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while.
Okay, we're gonna start off here. First of all, I want to thank all the people who made this event possible, beginning with the music festival, the Aspen Institute, Boogie, Gail Wineglass, Dr. Butters, Zeta Butters, and Jeffrey Pector, and the countless people who helped organize this. Yeah. My name is Daniel Joseph Watkins, and I was a close friend of Bob. Everybody thought that we had a strange bromance, and we dressed alike, spent a lot of time together, and we loved each other a lot, and he was my best friend. And, you know, the one thing I'll say about Bob is that when he listened to you, he would look you in the eye, and you could tell that he was really paying attention and that he cared. And when you had this large, imposing figure who quite possibly could have been the coolest human to ever live on planet Earth, when he was listening to you with that sort of intense focus, you felt like you were important because he was making you feel so important by being there and caring and listening and then coming up with solutions and hearing about your problems with an open heart and an open mind. And the one thing I'd encourage everybody to take away from knowing Bob is to try to be a listener like that to other people in your life, to care about what people have going on in their lives and to try to help them and to hear what's in their heart. And that's what Bob did. And I think that's something that we can all cherish and learn from him. So we have a ragtag group of speakers here. A lot of my personal heroes and friends, and my role here is to try to keep this event moving and uplifting and focused on what Bob would want. And Bob would want us to celebrate him and not have a down and out sort of sad fest. And we've all talked about keeping things moving, and so what I'm going to try to do is introduce each speaker. We're going to speak for about 5 minutes each, and then at the end we're going to hear a few songs and try to celebrate our friend. So first up is Gerry Goldstein, famous lawyer, and Real close friend of Bob.
Thank you for those kind lies, DJ, and not to worry, I'll finish my 5 minutes in the next hour and a half. Bob Braudis was one of the reasons we came to Aspen to raise our family back in the mid-'80s. We were latecomers. For me, Bob was Aspen. He was a giant who cast a broad shadow over this little village like no one else. He mentored our children. He taught us by his example. You know, his persona combined a righteous indignation with a sophisticated intellect and, to be honest, a wicked, naughty streak, which is what endeared him to many of us. Bob was a Boston Southie. He went to law school. His largesse was without equal. No one gave more or expected less than Bob. He charmed everyone he met. He had piercing eyes, a marvelous jovial manner, and this wide, toothy, shit-eaten grin, which he came to describe as his grill, for obvious reasons. A few years back, my bride, who is here, she accused me of a string of overindulged evenings, and in a rare moment of bad judgment, she enlisted Sheriff Bob to come and engage in an intervention with Goldstein. We spent the better part of the day up on Red Mountain working on my problem. And when we arrived late that night back at the house, Chrissy looked at the two of us and exclaimed, "Jesus, that didn't work out well." You know, he had an uncanny ability to masterfully serve everyone in this community. You could find him hobnobbing with the glitterati at night, and by morning he would be helping and tending to the needy and the homeless in this community. Everyone learned and benefited from his unquestioned humanity, his deep appreciation for history, and this treasure chest of apt Latin phrases to seal every lesson. And in times when the police were coming under greater and greater scrutiny because of injustices, discriminatory and abusive law enforcement, Bob's caring and respectful philosophy stood out like a beacon of hope and righteousness in a world that was becoming more and more intolerant. That enlightened philosophy of Bob's has served this community so well that to this very day, it is the envy of every troubled municipality in this country, thanks to Bob. On a more personal note, he was the only human on the planet who could reel in good Dr. Thompson when he was in need of a rational dose of sanity, which he would do regularly in courtrooms and bar rooms, which we all three spent way too much time in. He became a fixture at Christine's big round dinner table. He could hold his own with celebrities, historians, and scholars. I've sat and watched him give a civics lesson to a federal judge and get into deep, heady discussions of global politics with editors of major publications around the world and icons of world finance, all of whom he enriched. They walked away from that table blessed with having Big Bob pollinate their fertile gardens every night. In my mind, his politics were impeccable, and his moral compass was spot on due north. He was my very best friend. But then he was everybody's best friend. That was the beauty of Bob Braudis. Some time back, he promised my bride that he would never abandon us. Then, just when we were starting to believe him, he was gone. That's the only time I'm certain he ever lied to any of us. His wisdom was Solomon-like. He taught us how to live our lives, and in a weird way, he taught us how to die. At peace, with dignity. Bob weathered at least 9 fucking lives to their fullest, with greater zest and more zeal than anybody I've ever met. Rest in peace, my brother. You've earned it.
Thank you, Gerry. Next up, we have Bob's granddaughter, Mia, come on up. And Bob had a beautiful family, and he cared deeply about them. And let you go.
Hi. Thank you for the beautiful family comment, DJ. Thank you. Come on. Thank you. Also, look at you guys. Wow. Beautiful. Everyone's hair is amazing. Anyways, I would like to start by saying the entire town of Aspen is now shorter. Well, the first thing people say when you hear the news is, well, he was old. But the funny thing about my grandfather is he didn't really seem that old. He seemed invincible, kind of, like an old relic at a museum that you just kind of get to look at and you're kind of scared of at the same time, but you're like, how close can I get without getting fined? Whether he was enjoying cruising around town on his white Suburban with a distinct DiSalvo for Sheriff sticker, bumper sticker, or enjoying an afternoon cup of coffee with his friends at Victoria's before it closed, I always felt his presence somewhere in the crowded streets of Aspen. And I still do. Even though Victoria's is closed and he is physically gone, I can still see his rich, gapped smile spread cheek to cheek when I announce we brought cherry pie. I can still smell his cologne seep into my lungs when I give him a hug, even though I only went up to his belly button. Sorry, I lost my place. I should have double-spaced this. I can hear the soft prose he spoke to me on iMessage texts in 3-word sentences because his phone is zoomed up 230%. My grandpa was a tree to find shade under on an unbearably hot day. He was the one to crack the awkward silence at the table on holidays because sometimes we're all just too caught up in our own shit to actually be present and tell hilariously, mildly erotic stories of the good old days or share a wild anecdote to keep the group engaged while eating dessert. But now that he's not here to do that, he will be my reminder to carry that same eccentricness to life every single day, to stay humble and kind and never say no to your mom when she asks you for a favor. Yeah, who loves your mom? I love my mom. Stephanie, mwah. To walk tall, no matter how short and insignificant you might feel, because you never know how many souls you've touched until you're not here anymore. Yet, I think we all can tell how many souls my grandfather has touched. Look around, everybody. Thank you, and I love you all. Mwah.
That was amazing. Thank you. Next up, we've got Bob's godson, Kyle. We, on our trip to Santa Cruz, about 2 weeks before Bob died, he recounted all of his family days in Boston, growing up as a young gangster in Southie, and then moving to Buffalo and meeting Kyle's family. And they spent a lot of time together, and Kyle was very dear to Bob's heart. And so, with further ado.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be here and see all you folks who love him so much. And I think we all know what a philosopher he was, and I wanted to just share one sweet line from Khalil Gibran. Man's value is in the few things he creates, and not in the many possessions he amasses. Bob died with very little, but as he would always say, his product and what he created here was peace. And I think this whole valley gets to live inside of a man's embodiment of something that he really gave himself and devoted himself to. And I sure hope that legacy continues, you know. I always got to come visit here from Buffalo, and one of my first memories of Bob was going on a rafting trip in the Colorado. I was just a little guy, and my dad had always told me these great stories of this epic man, and you know, and sure enough, when I met him, it was like, wow. And I shook his hand, you know, I had this little mitt, and it just enveloped in this giant hand, and he swooped me up and put me on his shoulders. I was like, okay, wow, and this is higher up than I've ever been in my life. And I actually felt really safe. And I think that was something so amazing about that man, just like so intimidating, and yet how could you feel so safe? And maybe that's part of it. You knew that in his care, it was gonna be all right. And so, you know, in one hand he had the raft, and the other the cooler, and me on his back, and he's just, hold on, he runs over, and this epic vista. And, you know, as a boy, just like first time in Colorado and on the shoulders of Superman himself. And he lets down the stuff, and how you doing, kiddo? And then he starts to water the chaparral. I think that day he taught me about how to be in the flow. My next good memory of Bob was after I graduated from high school, and my mom had just passed away, unfortunately, and my dad really loved my mom. They were really close. And he was there for some police convention in Toronto, and it was the first time he told me he was proud of me. And like, wow, to feel that from that man, you know, oof. I don't know, there's something about it, like, I was, you know, he's like, you going to Harvard, huh? You're going to Harvard? Well, it ain't from your dad and I. It's definitely your mother who's responsible for that one. And I made some choices about not going to Goldman Sachs and doing that whole thing. And, you know, a lot of people in my family were like, what are you doing? Why, you got the golden ticket? And Bob was just like, man, you're making the right choice. And I think that was something about Bob that was so sweet. No matter what it was, he like really got me and saw me. And I think as a young man, my father didn't necessarily show up that way, you know? Like, what are you doing? But Bob was like, no, you gotta listen to what's true to you. And I think that's probably the greatest gift a father could ever give a son or a daughter. And so I'm so grateful for that man, and I think probably all of us have felt that sense of fathering. And just like, I know he's such a public figure, but I guess I just wanted to share like what a good dad he was. Like amidst being like pulled to all of you constantly, like the level of care that he brought back to like the core of who we are, you know? And like what that means as a man, and I think every man here knows that. Like how hard it is to show up in the world so big, and when you're that big and asked upon so much, to make that kind of time. I think that's why it feels so good to be around him. So anyway, I will miss you so much, and I think we all will. And I think we can do it, though. I think we're going to be all right. So love you, Bob. Love you all. It's nice to be part of this Aspen family. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Kyle. Yes, sir. I'm glad that he brought up the Bob quote, you know, that peace is my product and business is good. And I think one of the far-sighted things about Bob that was really incredible was the real deep philosophy that he developed with Dick Keenest about what is community-based, compassionate law enforcement. And a lot of times, I think the legend of Bob can be so large that you don't realize that he had this philosophical underpinning that was so powerful, and how lucky we are to live in this town that he helped take care of. And I think he's also, his model of policing, I think, is something that nationwide and globally, everywhere else could learn a lot from. Something like Bob Braudis' Guide to Compassionate Law Enforcement. And I think that's a really powerful thing that he left us. Next up is DeDe Brinkman, who she spent a lot of time with Bob, and they knew each other for 4 decades.
Bob Braudis has been referred to as our philosopher king. Bob was with Hunter Thompson at the Jerome when we met. It was 1976. We were 32 years old. We immediately became friends. Who would have ever known that I would run his last campaign for re-election 30 years later? For the next 10 years, I watched as Bob, a single father, move away from teaching skiing into his career in law enforcement. Stephanie and Heidi, your father loved you so very much. Bobby adored his grandchildren, Katie, Mia, Jake, and Tyler. Then along came the little gift of Andrea, his great-granddaughter. And Joe Mitchell is his son-in-law. He really thought you were okay, too. When Bob was elected in 1986, the tone the sheriff cast was unquestionably mellow. Oh, excuse me. For 24 years, Bob was a popular and unconventional sheriff. He was quoted as saying that he and his deputies spent most of their careers looking good, driving fast, and saving lives. Excuse me a sec. Towards the end of his career, reflection and introspection were increasingly along for the ride. Bob was the sheriff of our town, but he was so many things to so many people. He was highly visible, sometimes controversial. He was also a mentor, a mediator, a dependable advisor, a confidant, and a good friend. Bob, our philosopher king, would want us to remember his mantra, live and let live.
I want to say a few other small quotes that I loved of Bob's, which was, he said, if you beat your old lady or you're driving wasted drunk, you're gonna get arrested. But why arrest people if you can let them go? And I think that was something You know, and I think that by scaring people or warning them, or if Bob got in your face, it did scare you and you did change your behavior. Part of me wanted to ask the crowd, if Bob helped keep you out of prison, will you raise your hand? And I think that's something that should be, you know, honored about being a cop or a sheriff, you know. He didn't want to get you in trouble. He wanted to keep you out of trouble. He wanted to solve problems. He wanted to take an issue and put it to bed. And I think that that was part of his philosophy that was really beautiful. Next up is Ed Bastian, close friend, neighbor. They shared a lot in the 80s and 90s together. And Ed and Bob had a deep bond for many years. And so with that.
Bob and I were the same height. But he weighed 40 pounds more. So I never would get into an arm wrestling competition with him. You know, Aspen has had, over its history, it has had, you know, millennia of American Indians caring for this valley. It's had the silver miners, it's had the ranchers, it's had the ski company developers, it's had the land developers. All that was happening before we showed up. 1969 was a big year for young Americans, very idealistic, coming to Aspen. It was often called the hippie invasion of Aspen, much to the consternation of those who tried to make Aspen this, you know, beautiful, bucolic, typical, like Swiss or Austrian resort. So Bob showed up about that time, and we were all deeply influenced by what the turmoil of the 60s we're experiencing, and now it was also really, really bad then. I think many of us in this room remember that. The assassination of President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, just the war in Vietnam, Richard Nixon. You know, we were all in serious protest, and we all believed that we could actually make America a better place. And lots of us showed up here. So Aspen became the destination for hundreds of disillusioned young Americans, determined to make America live up to its ideals, to end social injustice, the war, environmental destruction, and corruption of the military-industrial complex. We wanted to make Aspen an example of our idealism. How many of us were here at that time? Hey, look at this. Here we are. Yeah. And many of us who are here will have the same stories to tell that you've been hearing tonight about who Bob was and who he was to each of us. Bob came here with his family seeking to be liberated from arguably a corrupt way of life that so many of us were unwittingly groomed to perpetuate. We were raised to go to law school to defend the values that we were growing up, the racism, the narcissism, the way in which we were treating each other and women and minorities. We were raised, Bob was, to defend that. But somehow we broke away from that and we found refuge here in Aspen. Many of you know the story how Bob came here, actually, with his wife and 2 kids. And, you know, he wanted to ski, but he was also influenced by what was happening at the time. He got involved in Hunter Thompson's sheriff's campaign. He was very involved, beginning to find himself as a law enforcement official, as a sheriff deputy, something that I don't think he ever would have predicted for his own life. And working with, already mentioned tonight, Sheriff Dick Keenest, Dick recognized Bob's natural leadership capacity, his natural compassion, his way of interacting with those who were troubled and sought help. Bob experienced many of the same challenges of those he served, yet he was endowed with a heart of gold, always open and eager to help somebody who was suffering. As we said earlier, he was an activist philosopher, a man with a deep sense of moral justice, a man who dug deep beneath the veneer of the archetypal Western sheriff. He empathized with those who were addicted, mentally ill, physically and psychologically abused. He exuded a sense of shared humanity, shared the sadness and the challenges of everyone that he encountered. Bob, I think, is a hero to all of us, because we all, in a sense, wish that we could exemplify the ideals that we came here with in our lives, as Bob did with his life every day as a sheriff. And many of us, including myself, there are many stories that each of us could tell, and there's not time to do it. But Bob, he would seek, and this happened to me on several different occasions, he would seek to keep people out of the courts, to bring people together who were having conflict, to bring them into the sheriff's office, to sit down, to have a talk, and in the end shake hands and agree to be friends and to work well with each other. This was an unusual human being, and he was exemplifying that which we all wished law enforcement officials could be. So, to conclude, Bob was a dear friend of mine. We shared good times and we shared difficult times. We skied together, biked together, played gin rummy together, traveled together, and we got to know each other deeply in terms of our personal lives, the challenges that we have, and the contributions that we were trying to make to the community that we wish to serve. He left us with a legacy, an example, a way of being in loving and compassionate relationship with each other, in service to a greater cause than his own wealth and self-interest. I wish that Aspen today would hear that, in interest to something, a greater cause than our own personal wealth and our own self-interest. So may his legacy be perpetuated by each of us, by those who serve the people who elected them and trusted them to serve. May we all just have the courage to remember Bob and to try to exemplify his way, as was mentioned earlier, of looking at another person in the eyes with a compassionate ear, listening deeply, making the other person feel valued and as a human being and respected as a human being. That does more for healing than any amount of therapy, any amount of drugs could possibly do. So may we carry forth Bob's legacy. Shall we? All right, thank you.
Good job, Ed. Thank you, Ed. I got to spend a lot of time with Bob before he passed, and we went on road trips quite often to Los Angeles, and we would drive through the desert, and Bob would look out at the horizon and say, kind of waxing philosophically, "We are so insignificant." And he had this sort of deep calmness about him at the end of his life, and I felt like an inner peace that he had. And he had told a lot of our friends, "Hey, if you want to see me or hang out, give me a call. I'm around. It'd be great to see you." And there was this kind of subtle calmness, but also a knowledge that he wasn't going to be around much longer. Another person who spent a ton of time with Bob over the last decade of his life is Dr. Wendy Zaharko, and we like to call Wendy Wicked Wicked Weed Dr. Wendy. And they shared a lot of good times together, and she was a very close to Bob.
Hi, I'm the Wicked Weed Doctor. And I have a little issue with my voice, so just deal with it. Bob used to say to me, he always made things positive, negatives positive, and he would say, "Don't worry about your voice, Wendy. It's very sexy." So, Sheriff Bob was a unique and incredible human being. It was an honor and a privilege to know him and to share some life with him. I was lucky enough to know him well for the last 10 years of his remarkable life. We were like glue. I consulted with him on everything, and he would share his thoughts, his philosophy about life, and he would tell me wonderful stories of life on the beat, which unfortunately I didn't write down. Anyway, I will treasure our friendship in my heart for the rest of my life. But Bob wasn't your typical Western frontier sheriff. He seldom carried a gun. He was a peaceful man. Tolerance, compassion, and the ability to listen were his calling cards. And this was the way he practiced law enforcement. Sheriff Bob was kind. He was a gentleman, a scholar, a philosopher, an athlete, a true mountain man, and he was very big. He was 6 feet 7 inches tall. He was a man who was curious about everything. His thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and he was always reading and studying philosophy, history, and politics, and everything else he could get a hold of. With that amazing brain of his, Bob could have been anything he wanted to be, but Bob really just wanted to be a ski bum. So he headed west in his Jaguar in the late 60s and landed in Aspen, where he grew his family. He had married his high school sweetheart and had 2 lovely daughters, Stephanie and Heidi. Bob's life was full. And then he became our sheriff for 24 years. His family expanded, and he became a grandfather and even a great-grandfather. I'm sorry. Jeez. Whew. It's okay. It's very beautiful. I first met Bob in 2012 when he was still the sheriff. I was practicing cannabis medicine at the time. Bob came to my office on Cooper Street with his good buddy, South Boston Chucky. They'd been illegal pot smokers for years, and they thought it would be fascinating to be legal pot smokers. I quizzed Bob, "But aren't you the sheriff?" He explained he was very close to retirement and was probably the only sheriff in the country who was going to be able to smoke weed legally. I, of course, was all in on that. Throughout the interview, Bob kept reminding me that cannabis was his medicine and that all weed was medical, and that weed was actually the soundtrack of his life. Both boys left with their green cards from my office. A short time after that meeting, Bob and I started hanging out together. A walk through town with Bob was like walking a receiving line. People would constantly stop him, and there were hugs and tears and laughter. I heard so many times, "Thank you, Sheriff, for keeping my son out of trouble." Or, "Thank you for saving my son's life." Or, "Thanks for driving my kid home that night when he was drunk." I'd look at Bob and wonder to myself, who exactly is this guy? And then there were comments like, "Thank you, Sheriff, for keeping me out of jail." Or, "Thank you, Sheriff, for putting me in jail." Or, "Thank you for taking me to the football game and buying me pizza when I was still doing my time in jail." I realized how much Bob had been there sharing life with the people of our town, not just as a lawman, but more importantly, as a friend and a mentor. That was the Bob we knew and loved. Summiting Independence Pass was a favorite pastime for Bob. It basically meant getting in Bob's gigantic Cadillac, which he affectionately called his aircraft carrier, and driving with a group of friends all the way up to the tippy top of the pass. That was summiting for Bob Braudis. Bob liked motoring up to the closure gate on Independence Pass during the winter, and twice we pulled vehicles out of deep drifts. Bob would get back in the car, look at me, and say, "Texans." But Bob's favorite haunt was Woody Creek Tavern. He'd take the table. He'd take the table right by the door, and from his perch, he could keep an eye on the bar, all the people, the flying pig, and of course, photos of his friend Hunter, and even photos of himself. It was like a meet and greet on his own turf as people came over to chat. It was such a kick to watch him, the protector-in-chief, be with his constituents. And finally, I just want to end with a story about Bob that really sums up the man, his honesty, his courage, and of course, his humor. In 1976, when there was no snow at all on the mountain in January, and daffodils were coming up on the slopes of the Little Nell, Bob realized he needed a job to support his family. He felt being a sheriff's deputy would offer some adventure for a ski bum who didn't have any snow. His interview with then Sheriff Dick Keenest was a slam dunk. Dick loved Bob. As part of the process, Bob had to take a lie detector test in Vail. On the way through Glenwood Canyon, Bob pulled over to take a few puffs from a joint. You know, calm the nerves and clear the head. When he arrived in Vail, they hooked him up to the lie detector machine. First question, "Mr. Braudis, have you ever used drugs?" Bob answered, "Yes, sir." Second question, "When was the last time you used drugs?" Without hesitating, Bob answered, "Well, I smoked some weed on the drive over here in Glenwood Canyon." Bob was hired very shortly thereafter. He was hired for his honesty and the courage it took for him to be honest. Bob then became a rookie deputy in the Aspen Sheriff's Department under the very progressive eye of Sheriff Dick Keenest. Bob adored Dick Keenest, who launched Bob on his journey in law enforcement. Little did Bob or anyone else know that this would become Bob's life work in our community. And oh, what an outstanding job he did as the sheriff we all knew and admired. May he rest in peace, and may his legendary life and character continue to reign over our magnificent mountain community.
Thank you, Wendy. On that note about honesty, I love that story that she talked about Bob taking the lie detector test, but there's actually a second part of that story. And the questions just kept coming for Bob. And when it came to quizzing him additionally, they would say, "Have you ever smoked hashish?" Bob would say, "Yes." "How many times have you smoked hashish?" Is there a rubric or what? "Have you smoked hashish less or more than 10 times?" "More." And finally, they say, "Have you smoked hash more than 100 times?" "Yeah." And it kind of went on like this for a while. And when Dick actually hired him, he said, "I just have one more question. When you answered the question about how many times you'd smoked hash, you said more than 10,000 times." "And you were honest. Is that really true?" And like Wendy said, Dick Keenest was looking for honesty in his deputies, and Bob passed with flying colors. And when you think of crooked cops or lying people, you don't want those people on your staff. And Dick Keenest, he figured out how to hire cool people, dishwashers, former bankers, accountants, whoever, as long as they had morals and honesty. And he surrounded his department with great people, and I think that's something that Bob continued, and Joey as well. Next up is a lifelong friend, Don Stuber. And,
This working? You hear me way in the back? Wow. Look at this crowd. Eleanor, that PSA worked. How many of you guys heard it or didn't hear it over and over? Aspen Public Radio. The intro, legendary Sheriff Bob Braudis. First time I heard that, I cringed. I thought, Bob would hate that. Some of you know that, yeah, Bob would hate that. I gave it some thought, and first of all, Bob wouldn't hate that. Bob wasn't a hater. I don't know if hate was in that man's vocabulary. Bob was love. need a minute. This is my second memorial for today. It's been a long day. The legendary Sheriff Bob Braudis. There's another one. I know this valley is kind of famous for legendary lawmen, right? Down valley, we got, not Lou, before Lou, Doc Holliday, right? Another legendary lawman. Bob didn't carry a gun. Bob wasn't a man that carried a shoot. He could shoot straight, but he didn't need a six-shooter. Bob also, legendary Sheriff Bob Braudis. The way that was phrased, that wasn't about Bob, a legend that was created. That was about a legend of a sheriff. If any of you heard Bob talk about sheriff, talk about the origins of the word, talk about hearing where that all came from, you know that being a sheriff was dear to Bob, and it was part of him, and it was part of this community, and it was one of the things that kept him in this community. It's like we are part of that legend. Everybody in this room who's had the opportunity to interact with Bob, that's part of that legend. It's part of our responsibility to take that legend, to keep that legend going. As long as we say his name, as long as we live that legend, take part of that legend, we're keeping Bob's legend alive, and we're keeping alive the legend that is part of this community. Bob was the people's sheriff, right? Here's the people. So many of you out here I met through Bob. It's like I was lucky. We spent a lot of time, I call it like transition time, in between time. It was breakfast, lunch, the time in between work and time between going home. Chucky, I mean, how many breakfasts? You know, I can look out here, and it's during those breakfasts, or what Bob would call, Bob would say, "Hey, let's do a lap," and we'd walk around town. And it started out Billy and Patty. We were all sort of, it was like being with the Pied Piper, right? People would come up to us. Everybody would come up. I'm saying us, they'd come up to Bob. I was kind of just hanging around there. But I've got to meet so many of you and get a real feel of the fabric, the weft and the weave of this community. Thank you for that. Thank Bob for that. You know, everybody here, it's been said. I don't think I have to say anything more about Bob. I just remind you, be like Bob. Not, I see that. Don't be like Bob in every way. A little bit of caution here, you know. There's so many ways that we can't hang, you know. There's so many things that aren't good for us to be like Bob. But you know the things that are, the things where Bob touched you. Be like Bob. Oh, and remember again, you are all part of that legend. You are all part and the keepers of that gate. Say his name, tell his stories, pick your trait, be like Bob. In Glenwood Springs, you might have Doc Holliday and TB. We have bypass Bob and sepsis. Yeah, love you, gap tooth motherfucker.
I like that saying, be like Bob. I think there's so many things that we can learn from him. back talking about compassionate law enforcement and Bob surrounding and filling his department with interesting people, trustworthy people. One of those people he really depended on was Joey DiSalvo for a long time. I think at the end of Bob's career, he leaned heavily, constantly on Joey, and he trusted Joey, not only to carry on his legacy. And so Joey's going to be the last speaker, and then Cheryl's going to sing a song. Thank you.
I don't know why I'm here, but Chucky, we want to hang around with this guy Bob. He sounds like a lot of fun. Not the guy I knew. We're almost at the end of Bob-a-Roo 22. I want to thank you all for coming. It's impressive to see a turnout when a man passes away, and so many turn out. I think most people would be incredibly grateful if a handful of people showed up at their memorial services. Today, I'm going to speak to you not as your sheriff, but as a person who lost a friend. Marcy and I are grateful to have Bob in our lives. And I speak for Marcy today as well. I'm here to tell you stories about Bob, and please try and think as if you didn't know him and you met this person for the first time. When, in the early days, we used to do interviews with final candidates. They're called oral boards in our business. And Bob would ask candidates, pretend I'm a Martian and I just landed in Aspen from Mars. I know nothing about this place. I'm green, I live on another planet. He would ask the candidate to explain Aspen to me. What are the people like? What's the town like? Everything you know about Aspen. And if that person couldn't give the answer that made you one of us, you probably didn't get hired. Bob truly had no hard feelings for anybody. You're right, Stube, he didn't hate. He disliked, he didn't hate. He went out of his way to find forgiveness, except for possibly a few federal agents who hounded us both for several years. Be careful, they're among you now. I'm sure they believe we're plotting, even from Bob's grave, our next big move, and they'll investigate and never tell us when it's over. When Bob died, he left one of those pamphlets, 5 Wishes. After his death, one of the questions on the 5 Wishes was, who should plan your memorial? And in Bob's big sweeping handwriting, he wrote, let Joey do it, he's the idea factory. One final task from a man that I served for 35 years. He taught me, though, don't make big decisions alone. So I enlisted the A-team. Everybody here, Billy, Patty, Chrissy, everybody had a hand. I could not do this, and if you ever want to screw with a friend, tell them you want to plan your memorial. Especially if you're Bob Braudis. When I first ran for sheriff, Michael Cleverly was commissioned to do a poster in the political Aspen tradition. The poster is titled In Bob's Shadow. The shadow that Cleverly is referring to was filled with knowledge that Bob shared with me freely, and sometimes unknowingly. We would spend hours, days, months discussing the array of bizarre topics, sometimes while playing gin rummy, and sometimes we were doing less healthy activities. The point is, Bob was a fountain of knowledge and information that helped form me, and I'm eternally grateful. When I was elected, Bob said to me, You're the only other person alive who knows what it's like to be the Pickens County Sheriff. A strange lineage that was the source of pride for both of us. First bit of advice he gave me was, you belong to the people now. Serve them and don't forget you work for them. Oh yeah, and don't trust feds. And Bob took that very seriously, very seriously. Bob was an empath, which most people who serve are. And in my office, there's a statue that Hunter gave Bob. I think some of you have seen it. It stands about as tall as Bob here. And it's of Lazarus. Lazarus had leprosy, and the only people or animals that would be near Lazarus would be dogs, and they would lick his wounds. On at the bottom of this statue, Hunter wrote, Bob Braudis, he suffers for our sins. Lazarus suffered for all our sins, and Bob did too, and he took it on. And how it manifested sometimes was unhealthy, but a lot of times it absorbed, and it was beautiful. So I know you're all Googling Lazarus right now. It's a fantastic story. When Bob retired, his goal was to reinvent himself. Health issues got in the way of his reinvention. On July 3rd, 2012, we were at my house with Richard and Cameron. He suffered his first cardiac event in my backyard. He was immediately taken to Denver. The next day, Steph and I were at University Hospital for his surgery. The next 6 months were hard on Bob. Health issues were getting worse, but he kept on fighting. That's when the great reinvention experiment, I believe, was sidetracked. His heart, no doubt the biggest part of him, had a defective valve. A complex yet routine surgery ended the reinvention. No worry though, Bob had his brain, the best part of him was intact. And he was happy, and he was proud, and he liked his life. At this time after his surgeries, Bob lived in a one-bedroom behind the old chart house at the Aztec Apartments. His head nurses were Heidi and Stephanie, who were his angels. The rest of us you see behind me today would make daily visits to make sure Bob's needs were met. The apartment was like the Tonight Show. It was a constant parade of people, very, very strange people. No names, because you're probably here. Bob loved and collected very strange people. Look amongst you. The weirder they were, the better. He was entertained by oddities, even delusion. I guess I can and should mention Nancy Pfister at this time. When she was around, Bob loved her energy of weirdness, and he often showed up, often said, if there's a party that's dull and I'm about to leave, and Pfister shows up, I'm putting my coat up and I'm hanging around. He loved Nancy and the weirdness that she brought to all of us. He loved all the women in his life, and I mean that deeply, deeply. When we worked together, it wouldn't be unusual if Bob was going home to his wife or girlfriend that there would be a call to pick something up at the grocery store, and after a day of work, Bob would collect the groceries and go home and help cook dinner or watch dinner be prepared. He was a giver to the people who loved him. The pictures you see behind me are the worlds through Bob's eyes. DJ did a fantastic job of editing them, but often the pictures were taken way too close and way out of focus. He hardly ever took a landscape photo. Always people. He would then play the slideshow of these thousands of photos at his house. And when a photo came up of one of you, he would tell a story that reminded him of you. That was his daily journal. Some of the really weird photos you won't see today because you're in them. As DJ said, he was truly interested in people and honestly curious about the person in front of him. To be interviewed by Bob was an honor. It meant he was interested in you. It meant he could learn from you. Who was Bob? Bob was a gentleman. He wore a coat and tie, not as couture, but as respect for the occasion. Clearly, Gerry, you and I, and this guy back here are the only ones who got the message. Coat and tie was Bob's thing. Bob avoided confrontations all he could, but when he was in one, he was undefeated. Bob was also a major procrastinator who had the weirdest filing system I'd ever seen. He would let piles of paper pile up on his desk until they were maybe 6 inches high. Then he would slip the papers off the bottom and realize most of the shit had been taken care of by itself. And the pile kept moving like lettuce at the grocery store. You always buy the back ones. I never graduated college. However, my office was a university. The professors were people like Monty Chitty, Gerry Goldstein, Hal Haddon, Pamela Mackey, Hunter Thompson, Warren Zevon, Doug Brinkley, and Lyle Lovett, who wanted to be here tonight, but we were one day early. Ed Bastian, you were one of those people that for a long time I listened to you. As you guys heard today, this was my daily life. This is what I heard regularly. You're much more eloquent than I am, but I feel it, Ed. I was privileged to listen, and Bob encouraged me to listen to them. As part of my master's education came in the form of a very high-profile murder case in Denver. I'll try to make this story as short as possible. It involved a young lady named Lisa Almond, who basically was in the wrong place at the wrong time with some bad people that she probably really didn't want to be around. They got in a car chase with some police. The car chase ended in front of an apartment complex in Denver. The driver and the passenger ran out, left Liesl in the car. The cops came, Liesl was handcuffed, and a pursuit of these two men went into the apartment complex. One of the guys shot a police officer named Bruce Vanderjack, and then he and the other perpetrator were shot dead. Liesl was arrested and was given a life sentence for her participation while she was in a handcuffed patrol car. Somebody had to be responsible, and it was going to be Liesl. A book of Hunter's made it to Liesl in prison, and she wrote Hunter a note back, and in that note was her gratefulness for the book. Hunter researched it and realized this person does not belong in jail. So what did Hunter do? He too enlisted the A-team. He got Bob, Gerry, Hal Haddon, Warren Zevon, and others to help free Liesl. It was an amazing experience to sit among these gentlemen and ladies making decisions about getting somebody out of jail who'd been wrongfully sent there. In 2006, she was released from prison because of Bob Braudis and the others. I know Bob was very, very proud of this. He was the empath. He took it on. In my university, I got a Buddhism lesson from Ed Bastian on a regular basis. I still don't understand it. If you're lucky, you were there when DeDe was casting a commercial. You may even get an acting gig. I landed a role in a commercial and Bob got a movie. It was great. The most amazing topics were with judges, DAs, and defense attorneys. Unlike most law enforcement officials who historically disliked defense attorneys and press, they seemed to be natural enemies like the snake and the mongoose. Bob taught me to understand their mission, and it was not to be adversarial. Both defense attorneys and newspaper people have similar roles. Both keep us honest and hold us accountable to the rules so that people get accurate information and defendants get treated fairly. I learned that people I learned to sit and listen to some of the best attorneys in the United States. Pamela, Hal, Saskia, and Gerry, and others, you too are part of my education. I'm glad Bob let me into your world. Same for the newspaper people. Bob respected and admired all of you for the work you do. Bob admired reporters like Zacharias and Carol, Danforth, Dunaway, Travers, Colson, just to name a few. Bob taught me to let you in and let you become part of our organization. You aren't our enemy. Tell them the truth, Joey. They're going to get it anyway. Might as well cooperate as soon as possible. That was his philosophy when it came to all of you. We both believed that social media is killing your profession. It gave anyone a platform to lie, fabricate, without the same level of editorial scrutiny that you all get. Bob ignored these pontificants. In preparation for this day, I remembered how much time Bob and I spent together, especially in the last 12 years. It's hard to believe we saw each other almost every day for the last 35 years. We experienced and shared life, death, and love. He married Marcy and I 20 years ago and held my mother's hand when she died. A long time. The good news is I feel like I gained two sisters. Heidi and Stephanie, I will always be here for you and your whole family. In short, I had a front seat to a fantastic, sometimes very weird show, as well as a free education. Guess what? I don't have any student loan to get relieved. In the document, The 5 Wishes, Bob also, one of the questions was, how do you want to be remembered? And I really think it sums Bob up. He said, he cared for all. He may have missed a few, but at least he tried. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. We're now going to be serenaded by Cheryl Freimeyer. And I also want to thank Frankie Tadero and Dustin Lutomsky, who are playing afterwards. This is going to be the end of the event, this song. We encourage you all to reconnect with friends, hang out outside if it's not raining, have a drink at the concessions. And we thank you all. And I think the one thing that came up tonight was, you know, be like Bob and listen to others. And thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
Being here. Have a great night.